what is AI-enabled, predictable, and engineerable biology? Talking a little bit more about the biological sciences.
Sure, absolutely. So, at AIX, I think it's been great, for me to lead the healthcare and life sciences practice here in ushering this new era of what we call predictable biology, where biotech it doesn't need to be a wildcatting discipline where it's like drilling for oil. Now we can actually use all of this data to actually make informed decision outputs that can actually translate to better assets in development. And the biggest thing is that everybody has thought that this AI for drug development discovery is this magic bullet, but unfortunately AI can't replace wet lab validation, right? You still need to have expertise to fine tune this. And the biggest thing that I've been focused on at AIX is building a world-class practice around how do we solve this translatability crisis in biotech, right? As you know, 95% of assets fail. The attrition rate is terrible. Everybody knows that we solved all the diseases in mice, and none of that translates to human biology. So how do we use human biology from the get-go so that when we come in with these beautiful designer assets that have been algorithmically generated, that they're going to perform extremely well and not just bomb out in clinical trials? And this has been something that, backing companies like In Silico Medicine and BitBio and a lot of those in vivo therapeutics, that we started with human data from the get-go. And this is what's separating the AI drugs that are performing extremely well in clinical trials versus the ones that have bombed out, because I see a lot of beautiful designer assets that unfortunately were trained off of the wrong data, and then they just flame out because of toxicity, or oftentimes the patient cohorts that are enrolled in these trials, if you develop these assets off of homogeneous data that are, white males ages 20 to 40, right, of a specific type of cohort, and then you have the recruiting profile of multiple different genders, ethnicities, ages, everything, that asset is already doomed to fail, right? But people will still be trying to do that. And I think the AI biotech stuff has done a pretty bad job in showing, how do we optimize and develop assets better and cheaper, right? We saw that with Recursion, right? But I think companies like In Silico Medicine, with their lead asset being in phase 3, the reason why that asset did so well is because we trained it off of patient responder data from the get-go, and it was beautifully heterogeneously defined. And that's what turned asset development into a predictive discipline, because I knew with the highest degree of certainty that those assets would perform extremely well because we had already used the cohort responder data that would be indicative of those trial enrollments, right? So, and that's what we've been looking to build here at AIX, of building those models of backing companies that have really robust data moats and data like from Biopharma, but also that data is just unparalleled when it comes to diversity, so that we know that the next set of assets we're building with the highest degree of certainty will be ideally flipping that gradient on its head to a 95% success rate. So, but knowing that we still have to stick to the fundamentals and first principles basis of you have to get the biology correct, right? You can have a beautiful algorithm, but if the bio sucks, it doesn't really matter, right? So
awesome. So I want to unpack a couple of things you talked about. So this is something I've talked about for I don't know, since the beginning of my career, which is the fact that we don't really understand biology. We claim to think that we understand biology, but in reality, we understand a very, very small percentage of the actual systems biology that's taking place, specifically when you start thinking about a whole human body, the whole organism, what's really happening, right? And the complexity of that. And so is that something now where you think AI has gotten good enough, or machine learning models, right? Or are we actually starting to see returns from the system biology between just some kind of, I would see predictions in the biological model that happen at a mechanism level that don't really tell you anything about the organism, right? On its end. Is that stuff really coming into its own now?
Yeah, I think the holy grail of, AI-enabled life sciences is a digital twin of a cell, right? A virtual cell, and that we can understand these cellular dynamics, from that basis, right? And then ultimately scale that into that complex multi-organ system. And like you said, right, a lot of small molecule AI developers are focused on one mechanistic pathway. And as you know, human biology works in mysterious ways. Mother Nature does too. So oftentimes these models really suck at, predicting off-target effects, safety, and efficacy. And that's been kind of the first principle basis that we've been taking care of. Can we figure out 65% of phase 1 drugs fail because of toxicity, right? And oftentimes it's linked to mitochondrial toxicity, right? And that specific purview, how do we build, digital twins of cell-based mitochondria? And that was, the last investment I had done, Ignota Labs out of the University of Cambridge, figured out that by having the world's largest mitochondrial toxicity data set to extrapolate that and basically slingshot these distress assets in phase 1 back into clinic just by tweaking the chemistry a little bit. And I think that's been really important of how do we bridge the gap from like adaptive chemoinformatics, right? Like where we can take these drugs and retool them, because everybody's been focused on de novo asset development, which is awesome, right? But as you know, it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. And there's so many low hanging fruit plays in biopharma of shelved assets that, pharma spent 30, 50 million bucks on. And just because the tox profile came back and they didn't know how to retweak the molecule, they just shelved it, right? And I've been telling a lot of the biotech founders these days, especially in the market situation that we're in, of just go after all these distressed assets and try to figure out if you can tweak the chemoinformatic profile of this, and then do a CODA partnership with them or in-license it, and then you're off to the races. You're a clinical stage company, as opposed to spending 5 to 7 years doing scratch de novo asset generation and then crossing your fingers. Like there's a lot of stuff like that. So we're seeing that happen where there's a lot of asset arbitrage these days. And I was like, this is something that AI is actually quite good at. LLMs can be very good at doing graph neural networks for toxicity prediction. And unfortunately, a lot of people just like overlook that because it's probably not the sexiest thing, but only if you're a real, industry expert would you know of that specific type of problem and then connect the dots to, knowledge graphs would be an ideal solution for that. And that's where we're seeing that disconnect because, as you know, there's only like 15, 20 tech bio firms in the United States. And oftentimes the founders are in this pickle because they're only there in the early stage, right? And then when you hit growth stage, you have to hit the fundamental benchmarks to be attractive for an OrbiMed or a Deerfield. And if you haven't shown that pipeline progression and only moved laterally on platform, you actually destroyed enterprise value across the board. And I think that's why you've seen all these AI discovery companies be in a midlife crisis right now, because all the growth stage people said, awesome, I can't underwrite your AI. I can only underwrite the drugs that came out. Show me where you're at. And if you're not IND or clinical facing right now, you're like stuck in that purgatory where you're probably just going to run out of cash. And then somebody's just going to have to buy you in a distressed situation, or you just go to zero. So
it's interesting. We started touching on a topic I've talked about with a bunch of people here, which kind of like, I think of drug repurposing or drug rescue, whatever. It's kind of the same thing, right? That distressed asset that you just described. And what do you do with it going forward? One of the other discussions we've had is that there is a huge amount of IP that's actually sitting on the shelf. So think of all of the data. And by the way, if you go look in the big biopharma companies, right, they have enormous data troves on some of these assets, most of it which has never seen the light of day, right? So have you seen anyone who's done a good job of maybe finding those and maybe unpack? Because part of it is, can I repurpose or rescue this drug? The other thing is, can I acquire its IP? Do I actually understand what I need to understand about it? Do I have some of the information about it? Is there really liquidity in that market now?
Yeah, it's kind of wild. You can buy distressed phase 1A, phase 1B assets for like $60,000, $70,000, depending on the situation of the company, right? And as you know, everybody's been shopping around China these days. I think that one takes the playbook on that has to be pretty refined. But there's a lot of asset arbitrage opportunities if you have the unique market insight and ability to navigate it correctly, right? Because often understanding too, like the limitations of your own tech architecture, right? Like it's great that asset might be available on the cheap, but if you don't know with the highest degree of certainty that the algorithm you develop could actually contextually refine that molecule to make it successful, then you're just like, manifesting another failure. So I think when it comes to small molecule drugs, that's been the best play to take, right? Because small molecules easy to tweak from a chemoinformatic perspective. But if you're talking about IO or the more complex biologics, that's kind of, a crapshoot these days. I would like to get to the point where we could, sufficiently rescue failed biologics drugs, but given the complexities on the nature of it and GMP and everything, like it's a bit tough. But I think on the cell therapy side, the exciting thing that we've been, looking around is being able to actually program biology from inception correctly and define that software of life where we can differentiate cells in a controlled protocol fashion and repeatable. And that's what we did at BitBio. And I was, but doing it in a way that can actually increase enterprise value for everybody, but democratize access to critical therapies, right? Like, there's no point in having another CAR T therapeutic that costs $3 million for a protocol because, as you know, like, what's the trickle down economics on that? None. Like, it's like, how are you going to see these breakthrough therapies, ideally sherped and escorted to low and middle income countries? They'll never see the light of day. And I think the thing is that we have to use AI to tweak the unit economics behind the CapEx and the development of these. So ideally, the next batch of cell therapies costs less than $100,000, right? But I'm hoping that we can create these full stack companies where from inception of the molecule design to the GMP to the patient stratification and enrollment could all be done in one company. And truly be full stack. And by optimizing each one of that stage, we can get to maybe being able to get to market in less than 10 years and have a longer patent life on that. But most importantly, actually change the unit economics of these therapeutics so that people could actually get true access to it.